All right, next up, I have the honor and privilege to introduce two very, very powerful speakers with a lot of experience. We have Dani D'Amico joining us. She's a partner at McKinsey. Her experience is mostly focused on CIB, corporate institutional banking, risk and technology. She works with major financial institutions across the globe, across buy-side, sell-side market and intermediaries. Her experience spans across business strategy, capital, liquidity, risk from operating model assessment and development, analytics, regulatory response, and compliance. A lot of experience. As a transgender woman in the workplace, she focuses her advocacy on improving diversity and inclusiveness in the business world, as well as her local community, with a focus on gender equality and gender identity. We also have Sadiq Gillani joining us. Sadiq is pursuing a portfolio career within the travel industry. He's a chairman of the advisory board for Condor, which is the second largest airline in Germany. He's also on the World Economic Forum Global Future Council for Travel, and also a trustee for Stonewall. He used to be a lecturer at Stanford GSB, teaching a course for the MBA class on travel industry. He previously headed up the transformation team at Emirates and spent about 7 years at Lufthansa, where he was the chief strategy officer. Without further ado, let's give him a round of applause.
Oh, wow. That's quite a welcome.
Thank you, everyone. This is the last session, so we thought we'd spice it up a bit. So, Dani, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome, Sadiq.
It's great to see you again. We were just hanging out a couple of weeks ago in Athens, so lovely to see you here in London. I wanted to start out by, many people in this room aspire to work in consulting after their MBAs. You're a partner at McKinsey, obviously a top-tier firm. How did you get there? Tell us about your journey to this point.
So I kind of decided to do a career in consulting when I was sitting over there a number of years ago. I won't tell you how many. And I really thought that I was pretty scared about looking for the right place, and mostly because I just really bored with anything I do. And so I was scared about how can I hold myself interested in anything I do. And then I had some friends that said, hey, why don't you think about consulting? And as I realized, for me at least, of doing different projects all the time, it was kind of pretty cool to me, the idea of like jumping from project to project, and I never would have the idea of getting too bored before the next challenge. And that's kind of gotten me from project to project to project to project to kind of like build up my skill sets until I got elected partner, and was kind of fun.
I guess that's also what attracted me to consulting as well, this variety. Also the chance to work in many different countries. I know we were talking earlier, you've had the chance to work in places like Amsterdam, New York, London, Djibouti. Tell us about some of those experiences. I mean, working in Djibouti must have been a crazy one, but tell us about some of the crazy experiences you had along that journey.
The other thing, I love traveling, and to me the idea that I'd be on a staffing meeting and then the next 6, 8, 9 months of my life was going to be determined was like a really exciting part of it. And the practice knew that I wanted to be posted away for long periods of time. So I lived in Belgium, in Holland, in Germany, in Finland, in Italy, like all around the places. I also spent 2.5 years in East Africa. That was my career break, away from consulting, but it was kind of a consulting-like role. And that was like real life experience from the perspective that in a corporate world, you feel like you're in some high rise and you're looking at the world that is very small, and you always kind of, you think you're changing the world through like PowerPoints and Excel spreadsheets. And it's kind of difficult to relate how that relates to real life. And being in a little office in the middle of Djibouti in Africa, when you have a lineup up of people that are asking you to make 1 million decisions every day, all of a sudden, and my choice in Africa was doing it either in Arabic or in French, neither languages I spoke, was a little bit scary, but it was such a real experience of impacting real people's lives. And that happened like 100 times a day. So I kept traveling until I found New York, and I fell in love with New York, and then I stopped, well, I'm here now, but stopped traveling for a while.
Yeah, it's interesting how we've both ended up in two of the biggest cities, the most diverse, interesting cities out there. I've been working abroad now for the last 15 years, but have just moved back to London, so kind of gone full circle.
Yeah.
And you now, long term in New York. It's obviously that creates a lot of opportunities for us also socially. But obviously, you're focused on a sector which is quite traditional in terms of banking. How's the experience of actually focusing on such a conservative, traditional industry?
So, for me, you're right. Banking is a pretty buttoned up. I do capital markets, which is even more buttoned up than banking in general. So it's very much like my clients are the JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, Credit Suisse, all of the big banks. And usually, the other thing that happens is you become more senior, you end up dealing with more senior people at your clients. And the more senior they get, the less diverse they get. The one thing it meant to me is it was really difficult for me to come out. I could not really envision a world where I would kind of stop operating in a way that made everybody feel comfortable in a meeting room in a project to somebody that I thought would make people feel really uncomfortable. And so that kind of was like, I mean, on one side it was really hard for me to envision, I mean, I didn't, as in coming out and being me was not even a possibility. And then I did, and now it's, I don't know, it's somewhere between I paid a lot of attention to it, or it's amusing that I'm advising clients I'm advising middle-aged white men clients from wearing a dress, and they have to listen to me, so that's kind of cool. So yeah.
So tell us about that journey then. So I think for context, Dani is actually the only and first trans partner at a strategy consulting firm. I think that's quite an amazing achievement to be trailblazing. So tell us how life changed, say, before and after working in consulting.
So I used to make people feel really comfortable, and now I often don't make people feel comfortable. So that's kind of probably the headline change. And but then when you say people, who are people? So there's people that are like young people, there's women, there's men, there's like older, more senior men. And so as you start in that order, as I said, like the first group of people that I mentioned, largely comfortable as a whatever. And then as you get more senior and as you get more traditional, it gets less comfortable for people. So I think that for me, coming out was a. By the way, when I say coming out, I'm a transgender woman, so I use she/her pronouns in case anybody doubted that. I'm also a lesbian, but nobody ever asks me because the T is like overtowering my head all the time. So I'm talking about coming out as a trans woman in the workplace. And so the decision of coming out was a pretty scary decision because, like, as a consultant, for me, it's like project coming out. And I'm like, I'm good at projects. That's what I do in life. I execute on projects. And, like high stakes projects. And I'm like, this is a pretty high stake project, changing your gender. And so what I usually do is, as you start a project, you start looking for benchmarks, you do what ifs. I'm a risk partner. So it's like I evaluate scenarios, I do, like downside scenario, all of that type of thing, and look for, who's done this before. My clients always ask me, it's like, okay, so you're advising this, what do the peers do? And so I started looking around, and guess what? I didn't find any peers. I had this profound realization, it's like, I don't have a role model. I'm like on my own. And so for me, it was very much like coming out was, I knew I would fall, I just didn't know how far I would fall. So, and that was a scary part because, part two, how did you grow up to be a partner is very much as, and I started my career in London, and I'm Italian. And one of the first things that happened is I came from Italy, and as you do, is you get ready for your first day, you get a suit and stuff like that. I was a guy. And I wore brown shoes, and I walked into an elevator at one of the large banks, And everybody went quiet because I had brown shoes, and everybody, all these guys, were looking at my shoes. And clearly, if I think that brown shoes is what gets everybody quiet in the city, forget about like transitioning gender. I mean, it was like so far away. So my big lesson was just like, don't step out of line. Just like you do you, accumulate currency, and that's it. And just be good at your job. Just don't step out. That was my own lesson in life. And so coming out was kind of significantly stepping out of the normal, past the brown shoes, and with no role model. So I just, when I was in the personal space that it was closing in and I couldn't do it, I basically realized that, I had enough resilience built up through therapy and all of that to say, I'm just going to do it anyway. And coming out, I think coming out comes in phases. So you tell people and you're coming out a million times. It's like the fatigue of telling people. Initially, you come out, everybody's, this is amazing. And everybody in corporate America, by the way, they're looking for trans people out of the woodworks because they all talk about it, but they don't know who they are because there's just not many. And so everybody's like celebrating you as if something great has happened, but they haven't seen you transition. And then they see you transition, and things are a little bit strange because transitioning at work, you're going to be messy no matter what. You don't know what you're doing. You're like figuring it out, and you're figuring it out in front of people. And so you have the whole world to see you like messing it up every day. And it's not like a kind, fun group of friends. This is like people you work with, and God knows if people think this is welcome or not. And then my initial reaction was, past the initial euphoria, was the feeling of I didn't make people feel comfortable. And so at the beginning, there was a lot of like quiet hallway encounters, like and it was confusing. I mean, it was like a compass spinning of like, what's going on? And so I'd speak to my queer friends, and it's like, well, you're pretty significantly like step out of lane by switching. I speak to my female friends, and it's like, you've definitely lost all your privilege of being a man, and now you're a woman, so welcome to the club. So I was somewhere between now loss of male privilege and become a woman, or a transgender person, woman, and I didn't know which one it was. I just knew that my whole kind of, I was jarred. Didn't know. I was just so confused. And then with that is I knew how to act myself in a corporate environment, and I didn't anymore. I just lose kind of footing, which made for, an interesting few months.
But you raise an interesting point about the layers of diversity. I mean, even just being a woman in banking is already one level of challenge.
Of significant diversity, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're calling 50% of the population diverse, yes.
In my career, for example, when I joined Lufthansa at the age of 32, I received a lot of resistance, but it was always hard to pinpoint. Was it because I was much younger than my peers? Was it because I didn't speak German? Because I was ethnically diverse? I think being gay was so far down the list at that point, it didn't really matter. Mm-hmm. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's about the ability to build trust and the acceptance of society. I think what's also interesting is in our lifetimes, the discussion has really moved in society. So when I first started as a consultant at Bain in London, there wasn't a single out member of the consulting staff. And you think like today, the Bain London office would have, probably 30 or 40 gay consultants. So it's a lot has changed. I think you also maybe part of the reason why you've come out relatively late in your life is potentially also down to this issue of society.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think sexual orientation has received so much more attention in the last couple of decades, which has somewhat normalized things. It has made it better. I think there's been so much work being done by members of the LGBTQ from a sexual orientation. But we're really starting on the gender identity side, from the understanding and all of that. And I think that, I mean, a big part of it is you're going into an unknown. Hoping that whatever work has been done as the LGBTQ umbrella will help you. I mean, like, I was, as you said, I'm the first partner in the history of McKinsey to be transgender, openly so. I mean, no doubt there's other people that are, but are not out. And when I speak to a lot of my gay and lesbian friends, and bi is very much as, there's a pick and choosing your spots for being out. As a trans woman, you're kind of out all the time. I mean, you choose to transition is a path of no return. You don't choose to not disclose. I mean, you can, and nobody will believe you, or they know. So, you're going to be out every day, and you better be strong enough to be okay with that, or have sufficiently a good amount of friends that are going to be okay with that. And it's not your role to educate the whole world of what it means to be trans in a world that most people will tell. I don't really meet transphobic people, at least at work, or openly so. I meet a lot of ignorance. I meet a lot of people that have never met a trans person before. Especially, I mean, like, this is a mostly young crowd, and you're like, what are you talking about? We know trans or non-binary people. But, you know, past 30, it's like, doesn't happen often. Past 40 is like, doesn't happen. Past 50, which is my client group, it's just never happened before. And so there's an element of, it's never happened to me. So at best, you hope that this 50-year-old or 45-year-old has a kid who at the dinner table speaks about their friends or themselves or whatever about these issues, and the parent can show up and say, hey, you know what, I've met a trans person before and today, and it was cool. And so, you know, I've benefited from kids of my clients normalizing that for their parents, and then feeling proud that they can, in the flow of the conversation, of like, you see, I've got something in common with you kids because I now have a trans friend, and I'm old, but I do have a trans friend.
But you make a good point about acceptance and the ability to choose when to be out or not. And I came out relatively late in my career. I came out at the age of 26. So when I was a consultant at Bain, I was not out. And then after that, I was selectively out for the first few years. And I look back and I wonder just, you know, not being able to bring my full self to work in those early years and be able to talk about what I was doing on the weekends and revealing a bit more about myself. You know, on the one hand, you can, you know, I could just, you know, cover up a bit, but you must also feel this ability to not be yourself or the impact that has.
Yeah, no, we're all different. For me, coming to terms with what it meant to be trans, it was a life journey, which means that I was spending significant energy in my life trying to ignore the fact that I was trans. And so I didn't have a life. I mean, some people do. I didn't have a life where I'd be like trans at weekends and not at work. It was an all-in thing for me. So I built my life of pretending to be who I was not and trying really hard at working this life and this persona. There was a persona that I had created to try and fit because I felt too much pressure of not being me, not being authentic self like I am today.
So tell us a bit more about this persona that you created.
So for me, it was I guess people. I mean, some people would say, well, you've become a woman on your transition date, and some people would say you've always been one, and you just either didn't realize but the inside you were always one. And I like the second part better, so I'll stay with that one. And from that perspective, and this was reflections way after, because part of transitioning is you realize stuff all the time, was very much as, it was a question on role modeling. And somebody says, you know, are you talking role models, female role models or male role models? What about male role models? And what's fascinating is that I realized that I was just picking up role models along the way, and because I was so far in my head on the feminine or like non-identifying as non-male, but I had to conform to being male and presenting very male with no femininity whatsoever as part of me. I just started reverting to like a typical for me as a person that I was, male role models. So I would subscribe to overly masculine role model types, or like more aggressive behaviors, or more kind of like all out, like if you see, you know, the guys type thing, as my role models, which was, and people would tell me like, but you like that person? Like they couldn't figure out why I was attracted as role model to a certain type of guys, because it was just like, that's not you. And I'm like, I know, I'm trying really effing hard to be that person. And I spent a lifetime of picking like it was pretty comical how I would pick so out of character role models when people say, well, you're so much different than that. So yeah, it was, I did it badly.
But then how did your dating preferences change then over the years? If I can ask that.
So I said before, I'm a lesbian trans woman. So I've always been attracted to women. And so, you know, I just thought I was a straight man until I transitioned. And, you know, in figuring that out, I was, you know, by the way, transition and you start with hormones, and hormones kind of like completely change you. So it's hard to think pre and post, as you truly are. You're not a different person. Your mind ticks in a different way. And the welcome thing for me is that my mind doesn't tick like a guy's mind anymore. And so things change. And so for me, it was like, you know, this is a time to evaluate. Maybe I'm attracted to guys. Maybe I continue to be attracted to women. I tried really hard to think about whether I'd be attracted to guys. And the answer is no, I'm not attracted to guys. So I'm fully attracted to women. What I didn't realize is that I was always meant to be a lesbian woman. And so, you know, shout out to all the lesbians out there. It's like pretty amazing. And so being with a woman as a woman is a completely different thing. I mean, I speak from experience. Than being with a woman as a guy, and it's just a lot better. Well, for me. And why did you ask me this question? But I didn't realize that before. And when one night, obviously, after stuff, I woke up like, wow. So I'm a lesbian. For sure.
So we're living in an interesting time. There was a survey just came out by Stonewall last month, which surveyed people in the UK, and it showed that 50% of Generation Zs are exclusively attracted to
Gen Zs.
Gen Zs. Are exclusively attracted to the opposite sex. So this, if you think about that, that's mind-blowing, right? So the generation growing up is a lot more obviously open, and we could be ending up in a situation where our LGBTQ plus community is no longer in the minority if we can tap in to this, say, silent group of people. What's your view on this? How could this change things for our community?
Well, I have a strong personal view that there's very few people that are totally straight and very few people that are totally aligned with their gender binary. And there's a lot of people in the middle. And I think society forces people, polarizes people. So I think that, what we're seeing with Gen Z is like, they just don't care and they just do themselves. And so I think that there's just I don't think as young people need to explore more. I don't subscribe to that. I think as people are just allowing themselves to break out of those binaries, which is really cool. I guess they're falling into let's call it in this environment, at least in my environment, in a corporate world that is not quite ready to take them as that. And that's a worry to me because I think that there's so much more work that needs to be done to make sure that everybody is cool with whatever, as it should be. Because I don't have any skeptical reaction to that statistics, because to me it makes complete sense. And so I think in high schools right now, the fact that it would be a laughable statistic to say that okay, so you work with another big consultancy and you're the first trans person there, it mean laughable but also undesirable. Which you know, on the flip side of it, it does has the risk of perpetuating some self-selection bias. So you know, I'm just going to quote this because I think it's important. So at McKinsey, we've done a research on being transgender at work, and one of the findings was around where people were self-selecting themselves out of like traditional corporate roles into different industries, like the restoration industry, hospitality, and all like that, which also tend to be paid less, and two, they tend to be more part-time, so with less benefits, less health benefits, and all of that. And this self-selection bias it's a big deal. Because at least for the trans community, there's consistent and chronic higher unemployment. There's like less pay, less ability to get promoted, and all of that. I think is our job in our seats the panel before talked about allyship and activating allyship and stuff, because I think that having to choose between authenticity and career, it's a bad choice. And I think we should all aim to not make that choice and not turn up inauthentic to work because we happen to like engineering, consulting, airlines, or whatever. We should be able to not forego authenticity, or if you cannot not be authentic, we should not forego our career. So, and I think that, are we getting there? I think there's, people like you and I and people in this panel and people here are doing some great things about pushing this forward. And I think we just need to do more and continue to do more.
Yeah, it's an important topic. Obviously, we've been touching today a lot about allyship. I think for both of us, having allies has been a key enabler of our careers. And in corporate environments, reaching out to the other minorities, for example, during my time in Germany, I was very close to the few female senior leaders that there were in the company. There was always a common interest to help each other. So generally, like in those environments, looking out and trying to help and support other minority groups from whichever background is always helpful. Can you say any more about how you personally have benefited from allies and your mentors in the workplace?
Well, I'll speak obviously. Well, I don't know if there's sub now, but I'll speak about my reflections as experiences as Dani, me as a trans woman. Well, maybe not just that. I think like a big learning from my career is that career advancement happens through people supporting you. I spent a big chunk of my career, if something didn't go well, I would blame things or I would change company. And I realized that until you have people that have your back, and you get promoted by people, you don't get promoted yourself. And that was a big lesson. So I think like having people that support you and sponsor you is fundamental. Having people that sponsor you and support you as, let's say, out of the main lane, like I've significantly stepped out of the main lane, is also very important. And I also don't take lightly the fact that I'm already a partner, and so I do have some benefits with that from people see me as somebody senior already, and so it's a little bit different. But still, I think that in consulting, we have a thing which, at least as a partner, you have a thing which is people welcome you to their accounts, and can you add value to the account, and where there's still the vast majority of people in the corporate world are male, I would rely on my male colleague partners, and just say male because there's a lot of them, to welcome me into their accounts, to be thrive myself and be successful. Now, can I be incredibly helpful and value added to our clients? Absolutely, every day, and I do. It's just that their ability to give me access to that, it's a lifeline for me, and that it doesn't go without saying. And so I think for me is I think having people that understand who you are and will want to work with you and take pride in working with you is important. So I tend to build good relationship with my colleagues and clients. I hope because I'm likable or good at my job or something. A client of mine asked me to help them in their embracing trans individuals in the workplace. So this company was a small bank called JP Morgan, and they don't have a trans MD in the whole of JP Morgan. So their LGBTQ group is like it's hard to get visibility. And I know the senior executives there, and I'm like, maybe we can do something together. And so for Transgender Day of Visibility in March last year, we organized a fireside chat, much like this one, but with the CFO of JP Morgan. So this was the global CFO that usually speaks to analysts and at press conferences on their earnings, and was speaking to me. And Jeremy is a good friend, but it was fascinating because I was the first transgender person Jeremy had ever met. And it was this 1 hour long fireside chat that was broadcasted to the 270,000 employees on Transgender Day of Visibility. And I think that was a significant, I mean, to me, I was of service to them because it humanized a senior leader of like, I'm gonna take an hour out of my day to talk about something that is important to us as an organization. And I think that, I think Jeremy came out as an incredibly strong ally, and I wish for every senior leader to do that and to invest the time, because I think signaling is really important.
And I agree. Also, if I look at my career, the importance of allies, I think it cannot be understated. I learned one rule at business school, which is the 20-60-20 rule. And that's 20% of people will support you, 60% of people will be in the middle, and 20% of people will be actively against you. And it's just a rule of thumb. But I really noticed in my career that there were 20% of people that, because you were so different, that there was really nothing you could really do to get them on your side. So the best you can do is really damage limitation. And then the trick is using the 20% which do find something about you interesting, and they like that you're bringing a fresh perspective, and getting their support to help with the 60% in the middle who are more influenceable.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right.
So we talked a lot about mentorship, we talked about allies. What other advice would you have for this kind of group now, kind of thinking about their careers?
Good luck. No, I have more than that. Well, so the first thing is choose the company that there's a lot of privilege in this room. And I consider that I come from my education, from my professional upbringing, sitting as a partner of a big consulting firm. I have a lot of privilege in being who I am. But I think everybody in this room has privilege from the perspective of having been to great business schools and having great education and stuff like that. With that comes a little bit of choice on who you're going to go and work for. And I think that is very important to be careful in the selection of that from the perspective of how well represented am I in this company? How important is the LGBTQ group in that company? How active they are? I think I put them in the bottom 20% of your. I find companies that just switch their logos to the Pride flag on Pride Month on LinkedIn, and that's all they do, is like, to me they're bottom 20% because they think that they're doing something just because they switch their logo. And I think like weeding out companies that just like to have a couple of posts about how kind of LGBTQ friendly they are the companies to stay clear of them. But those are a few. I think that And even in my travels, in my clients, I can see a significant difference in how much some organizations care about and organizations that don't. For me, as being trans, there's an organization in London called Trans in the City. And this week, it was Trans Awareness Week, and there was a lot of activities being organized. Just by looking at the sponsors, who turned up there, who hosted those breakfasts. There was a breakfast in Canary Wharf on Tuesday with CEOs on being for trans awareness. So who turns up, who sponsored, those are big indication of how much the organization cares about the LGBTQ topic. So I think that's kind of important, number one. And maybe at the beginning, when people are more focused, getting skilled on a foundational set of skill set may not be as important, but that stuff is really important as you get past the first couple of years in a career. Number two is be active in the network. There's always good networks of LGBTQ in those companies and across the range. And what happens in those networks, I've seen it over and over again, there's no organizational layers, largely. Everybody is in the same community. And when you break down layers like that, it means that you're gonna make friends across the board. And some of the friends will bat for you back to the sponsors, and some of them will coach you and guide you, and some of them may make a huge amount of difference to your life and career. Because you've got an extra network in the company that you can rely on. I've joined McKinsey not long ago, and I've been all into our own LGBTQ group. Like, I've made more friends and people that are helping me significantly in my integration in that network than in my practice. And I'm not saying that I'm not doing well in my practice. I'm just saying it's been an extra thing that some other people, the straight white guy that came in, does not have the benefit of the additional network that I have. And so it's a huge benefit. So get involved.
Yeah, it's a big dilemma for many people in this room is how much do you want to be a trailblazer? For example, when I went out to join Emirates and move to Dubai, being one of the only out executives in the region, for me, I thought, okay, that's actually a good chance to kind of trailblaze a bit. But if I had done the research and looked into the culture of the company more, I would see that it was not a diverse place at all, even in terms of gender diversity and other diversity. But there was a certain attraction to that. But how resilient are you? How much do you want to go through that? Because on a day-to-day basis, it's not going to be easy working in cultures where there isn't much diversity. Because in most of the companies I've worked with, if you're working with a lot of old white straight men, it's day in, day out. It will be tougher than working in a more diverse firm.
Yeah. No, for sure. And like my own reflection is, I am already quite senior, and to me, I feel that given the lack of representation, I feel that I need to be out there. I need to be very vocal in my company and push the boundaries hard. I came in with pretty much an understanding that I will identify blind spots. The answer has to be yes all the time. I can't work in an organization. I think there was a question before about what do you say to your company about, I think one of the answers was around hostile geographies on LGBTQ. I think identifying blind spots in the companies and having companies open to it, I don't think everybody can do it, but I feel that I'm better placed than somebody else to do it because I'm a partner and I do it. But not everybody can, but everybody will benefit from it. And I think, we have two networks within McKinsey. One is trans and non-binary people, and the other one is parents of trans and non-binary kids. And there was a blind spot in the benefits for a parent for a trans kid. And I can't remember if it was around blockers, hormones and stuff like that. But I think they found out that through some legal language on gender, on the insurance, it wasn't covered for their kid because the kid was non-binary or something like that. And they panicked. I mean, this was like a big deal. And And I think they went around to the insurance and they just hit a dead end. And I was just like, I just called the head of benefits at McKinsey. I'm like, this is covered for other cases. There's no reason why this is. And it was done within a week. And for me, it was a phone call. And I realized like I can impact with so little effort, and I cannot not do that then. Yeah. And I think to me as a senior leader, I need to do that. I need to do those things. I need to be helpful because I can make a lot of impact. But it's also fully okay to be just involved and plugged in and not feeling that you need to fight the fight every day. I think that's totally fine as well.
So I think from the discussion, I took away 3 learnings, I think, for the audience. I think the first is around mentorship and role models and the importance of that, of mentorship. I think the second point I heard from you is around choosing the company you're working for quite carefully. And the third point was about being active and using the community that we're all part of. So I think that was actually some very helpful guidance for this audience. We'll now open up to you guys to take any questions for either of us. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, folks. My name's Kevin. I was just on the panel before you. Sadiq and Dani, question for you both. As LGBTQ plus people in organizations, we often take on additional responsibility outside of our day jobs to educate others, et cetera, et cetera. And you mentioned sort of taking on that responsibility as part of your discussions. I'm curious as to what tips would you give this room to deal with the pressure that comes with being, I think in a lot of cases, the only person, especially in your case, Dani, and potentially Sadiq, person of a specific type of diversity who then is expected to speak at many different commitments, et cetera.
Well, first of all, I have an issue because usually that's called the gay job, and I'd like to recall it something else, maybe the trans job or something. It's like I have my day job and my gay job, and unfortunately it rhymes, but so it goes part to choosing your company right. So I attended the equivalent of this conference in DC a few weeks ago called Romba, and there were a bunch of gender non-conforming individuals, and I connected with them either through them like coffee chats or just like at the bar in the evening and just like talking about it, and I think that for them the impression of and there was a few of us there, and one comment they made is it's pretty impressive that we're connecting with you guys, that I'm seeing people like me here. If you come into a company and you ask around, it's like, well, are there any trans people here? And there aren't, it's probably because there aren't, and so it's gonna be hard to not be called to do an endless and nth training day, because you're always gonna be be called to do all of the stuff, the education, which is gonna be unfair. I don't think you wanna be in that position unless you really want to, unless you like, that's what I wanna do, I wanna make a difference. But I think that choosing the company where you are well represented, it's a good thing because there are those pressures, and sometimes people don't want to do it, don't feel like doing them, and that's okay. You should not feel being that all the time. It's tiring. It's really tiring. Being the resident gay, lesbian, trans, bi, it can take a toll, and it's just like no endless of work because people do call on you a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I think it's a great question. Maybe that also reflects the differences of our positions in the community a little bit, because I think for me, the role modeling work I've done has always been, let's say, something I've done in my spare time as my social time, let's say. And for example, when I was at Lufthansa starting an LGBT network inside the company, that was something I saw as fun, broadening my network. It never felt like it was any kind of working time. So I'm sure you're getting called also for a lot more engagements across so many different companies as well. The events I volunteered for, I really enjoyed these kind of events, and taking time on a Saturday to be here, for me, it's never felt like work. So it's it's something I've been always happy to do. But I think now you know you're a precious minority, and obviously a lot of more pulls on your time.
Well, but I mean, I love doing it. I turn up. I'm saying not everybody does, and I think that if somebody wants to do that, I think you'll find your own spots. But if you don't want to be that person, you don't have to be that person. It shouldn't come as an expectation because you're part of the community to be that person if you don't want to be that person. And I think we're both have done a ton because we want to do that, and that's okay too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ryan?
Hi. So Sadiq is a good friend of mine, so really nice to see you here at LBS, and nice to see you, Dani, as well. So my question is, there's been a lot of discussion around the company side of it, and for example, if you're in a big company that has like the education and budget to support the community, that's one thing. But more from, the question is to both of you about the client side. So obviously with the client, you can't really call them out in the same way you would call out the company. And as someone like myself who's like a business owner working independently, I don't have like a community within my business to draw from. So I'm working with my clients who are largely the older white males or countries that are maybe a little bit hostile to LGBT people. So I just thought if you could maybe share about your experience of navigating the client landscape as opposed to the company.
That's a good question.
Yeah. You want to go?
Okay.
I mean, I can. I said it before, but
Okay,
I'm like,
I'll start. I'd say in general, clients surprise you. I've generally taken, I'd say, one more step of caution in terms of being out with clients, mostly because if you're working with someone for say 3 months, you're never sure, let's say, if it's necessarily worth or how much investment you want to make in terms of the relationship. But I've always been surprised, as in I've had, for example, female clients who turned out to be super gay-friendly and actually ended up actually being an advantage, being gay. And then there's been other times where it hasn't come up, but people have kind of raised it on their own, and it's just also then been very supportive. So I guess people have really surprised me over the years. And so I would actually, looking back, and as I said, I came out relatively late, looking back, I would have been even more open than I was with clients, because even the ones that I thought might have been resistant, and for example, working in Brazil, I always thought would be a conservative country, actually ended up being actually really okay and supportive. So yeah, people surprise you.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you. So in consulting, we have lots of clients, that's our business, and we have lots of projects within those. So the applicability of your question is fairly existential to the consulting business. And I think it's a really important question because it is absolutely culture defining. How you act towards your clients and how that reflects on your own culture is absolutely defining. And so giving a pass to a client on improper behavior, it is really, really toxic. And that's the thing is you don't need to do that. I mean, I'd like to think that if somebody asked me, what is it like to work at McKinsey? I wouldn't, listen, I work so hard at authenticity that giving an inauthentic answer of like, oh, we're great, when I don't think that, when I've seen things are not great, would be really hard for me. And I'd like to think that, the vast, vast, vast majority of clients are cool. And maybe maybe I'm biased because I don't have, at least in the US, for example, Midwestern clients in the old industrial belts of really old. I don't. So maybe I've got a bit of a blind spot there. I think the vast majority of clients are really good, if not great. I mean, I've had a great experience. But it can happen that stuff happens and you need to stand behind the team. And that stuff to me needs to be taken really seriously. And it could be a little thing, but even that, it could be taken seriously. And that leading by example, it is vital to the team that you're in and to the well-being of your people. If if a client is uncomfortable with a female project manager or a gay manager or consultant and just agreeing to swap them out, it would be really toxic. Having this is the team, if you don't want the engagement, this is the best team we have, and it's too bad, it would be a more appropriate answer. I had in my own experience that I had a client that it was a long onboarding process, and they kept pushing my onboarding. They deleted my whole file because I put in my preferred name in the legal name box and my legal name in my preferred name box, and they voided a 10-hour application 10 hours of my time, and where I had to disclose every address and every flight I've taken the last 10 years. And I'm sure it was somebody that didn't like the fact that I was trans. And that conversation went between me, the lead partner, and their head of D&I of the business. And it was a big deal. And on top of that, they also started putting my email with my legal name versus my preferred name. And like dead naming a trans person is no fun. But that was a big deal. And I was happy that it was a big deal, because it would have been bad if it wasn't. If my company didn't take it seriously, I would have had a big issue with it. And I'd like to think that I take that seriously if that would happen to any of the teams that I work with.
Thank you.
Thank you for the beautiful fireside chat. I think a lot of us learned a lot. I have a question for, I think, kind of both of you. We see that a lot of multinationals and conglomerates, they develop new policies to be more inclusive towards LGBTQ people, trans community, trans inclusion policies. Do you think they should apply them everywhere they are operating? For example, Amazon applying trans inclusion models in Poland or Dubai?
So the answer is yes. The answer is more complicated in geographies are not as LGBTQ friendly, because fact is LGBTQ people like to also live in countries they call home, so it's harder. But there's stuff you can do. So within McKinsey, we've created what's called a Gender Identity and Expression Council, and this is a group of people under our LGBTQ group to basically improve the life of trans and non-binary people, as well as parents of trans and non-binary kids. One of the things there is trans inclusive benefits across the company. We have pretty good benefits in the US, in the UK, but then is a little bit spotty. And I think the idea that a Korean colleague doesn't have as much access to hormone therapy as a US one doesn't make sense. And so I think that part to the answer has to be yes, is we need to push in benefits equalization across the world. It's an important thing, benefits. If you take benefits for, you can go with benefits for trans people, it's a good one, but think about same-sex couples. So in countries where you cannot legalize marriage, it's hard for a company to say, what do we do about it? But having an insurance that will cover IVF, having that insurance that will cover surrogacy, all of that stuff can be vital to the well-being of somebody that they may choose to live in that company. So I think I think pushing hard is important, and especially because people always say, like all the policies are always like US-centric, UK-centric, versus what about us and the rest of the world? And I think it's really important to not be exclusive.
Do we have time for one more? Or okay, so one last question then.
Hi, thank you again for sharing both of your stories. Earlier in the talk, you mentioned ignorance, right? You come across people just who may not have been exposed to a trans person. So I was wondering, and first let me admit, I do have some self-education to do on my own, but I'm wondering, where do you draw the line in terms of deciding not to like educate this person, right? Because as you mentioned, it's exhausting, right? So for both of you, where do you draw the line, and what advice do you have on increasing exposure and just awareness about certain issues?
Well, I'm a partner in banking and risk, so 80, 90, 95% of my work is there, of the life I spend in my company. And then I have the side job, which is LGBTQ stuff. The line is pretty simple. I don't talk about it. It's not, for me, I don't want to bring my transness to a project, to a client meeting. I'm bringing me as the expert in banking and capital markets to a client meeting. I think that for me, there's part of an education, which is, A, I look normal. B, I'm not here in some kind of like a pride show coming in with like feathers or dress up as a drag queen, because that is a stereotype that people have of anybody kind of crossing the gender lines. And two, I mean, I'm a thoughtful person that is as much of a right to be a partner as anybody that is gender conforming. And I think that is education enough for people to spend an hour or a project with a person that is transgender, because for them, they can make up their own mind about what that it means to be transgender. And then sometimes people would ask me, can I ask some questions? And I'm like, absolutely, you can ask some questions. But to me, the line is, I don't like freely educate people other than being myself.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. I mean, the question doesn't come up that often in terms of trying to, asking for how it is. But the times it has come up have been a bit strange. So, for example, I was once on a flight back with a Lufthansa executive board member, and after knowing him for 3 or 4 years, he asked me, how is it being gay inside Lufthansa? And ended up a very strange conversation where he outed himself as being bi, but it took several years before that came out. And another conversation from my Germany time was also with my assistant, where she had heard a rumor that someone had seen my online dating profile, and that you could see my sexual preferences in there. So those were the kind of conversations I've had about in the workplace.
Is this your Grindr account?
It was actually for the Germans in here. It was my Gay Romeo account back then. So when it has come up, it's come up in very strange ways in the workplace. Usually it doesn't come up. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.